When you hear the word debt, people often think about student debt and credit card debt, but it's actually the entire base, the foundation of our monetary system. And if we don't learn about it, we are going to be crushed. You came here for the truth, so let me unveil that for you. In today's video, I want to talk about all things debt. We're going to look at the United States, we're going to look at Canada, we're going to look at this all over the place. And if you stay tuned, we're going to look at a picture of Janet Yellen. The very first thing I want to start with is this: the start of de-dollarization. I showed this recently, and what you're looking at here is China's gradual move away from the US dollar. There's no question about that, but understand something. This is the share of foreign exchange transactions. It's mostly US dollars. You can take that US dollar to basically any country in the world. In fact, even those that the US has heavily sanctioned, and that US dollar is likely worth even more than their local currency. The important point here is that this cash, this money, like if you had a $100 bill, it is actually made of debt. It's such an odd concept, and even I'm always kind of reminding myself that this is not something of value. It is actually something that's in the negative. It's such a weird concept to understand. It has, in a sense, negative value. It's so hard to wrap your mind around sometimes. Canada to spend more on debt after rate forecasts edge higher. And we've heard a lot about this before. And one of the problems with Canada, and there are many, one of the problems is that Canada, number one, has way too much household debt. We know this. But as a country, they pumped in even more money per capita than the United States did during 2020. At the same time, we have high interest rates, or higher interest rates than we've been used to for a while. And of course, this puts pressure on the country as a whole. Canada's government says it will spend more on debt costs this year as it updates its forecast to reflect a higher than expected outlook for interest rates. They're going to spend billions of dollars on public debt charges in the 24-25 fiscal year. That means you, the individual, need to ultimately pay more. They're going to tax you more. They're going to squeeze more out of you. And this is all in the calls for, hey, we got to cut interest rates. We need to do this now for so many different reasons, right? Well, that is just one thing. It's the same in Canada and everywhere else. But it connects with this: a debt crisis at the economy's edge. This is out of the Financial Times, and they have several good charts in here, so I wanted to show it to you. All right. Looking at this, they show us the household debt. And this is just one example, okay? Household debt as a percentage of the GDP down significantly. So everything's good, right? Everything's great, isn't it? Let me make that so you can see that. Look at that. Household debt rose considerably during this period of time. Since then, it has been declining. Now, of course, 2020, a bit of an anomaly. So that means, everything's great, right? Well, what's important is that mortgage debt hadn't been such an issue at this time now than it was before. Okay, so that's really what it's all about. That's the important note. When we look at this, household debt subcategories as a percentage of GDP. So a lot of that has come down. The student loans, of course, haven't been paid off. They've been forgiven. So that's on your back now. Auto loans, I think that's a little bit of something to watch there, because the auto loans themselves are getting stretched out further and further. That's important to note. And then credit card debt has been rising as well, with delinquencies, 90-day plus delinquencies rising to levels. I think we're at a record high. I could be wrong on that, but I did show that in the last couple of weeks here. But it is excessive. It's near a very high point. There's no question about that. Americans in the aggregate don't have a debt problem. That's the Financial Times. They're telling you that. Except, of course, for the debt carried by their government. But aggregation deceives. As we have discussed before, households who are on the lower end of the income spectrum and carry floating rate debt appear to be in real trouble. This is showing up in both delinquency statistics and the earnings of companies that serve the working class and the poor. And that's where we get to this. You can see for yourself, transition into serious delinquency, 90 plus days, credit cards, right? And so there we are. We're not quite, for credit cards anyway, for a lot of that, we are moving back into the direction of 2008, 2009. That was a financial crisis. Like now we're in the good times, aren't we? We're not in a recession, supposedly. Unemployment is super low. The jobs are abundant. This is the good times. So why is the delinquencies acting like we're in like deep in a recession here? Isn't that unusual? Isn't that unusual? Right. You could look at the maxed out borrowers, see increasing delinquencies. You could see how excessive this becomes for people. They're being pushed to the edge. And that's why they go on the buy now, pay later type of programs if they have nothing else. All right. Gold, of course, is kind of a hedge against the inflation that we've been seeing. It's kind of a hedge against the US dollar. And anytime you see turbulence, gold becomes more attractive. So, of course, its performance over the last little while has been, has been attractive. There's no question about that. Understand that there's a deeper level to this as well. So we can see the household debt. We can look at the credit cards. I'm showing you all the different forms of debt. China sells a record sum of US debt amid signs of diversification. I said this before, they're selling off US debt, they're buying gold. That's the short story, okay? And so over time, they've been selling a lot of their US debt. In fact, you just look at the stats, 2013, 2014 timeframe, it's at the peak, about $1.3 trillion worth, and now they are at about half of that. They've been selling that down over time. Some months, maybe a little bit more than some months that, it's down, but the trend has been very clear. It's been down for many years right now. China is diversifying. They're also doing that. Like, why would they hold US dollars? Well, you hold US dollars if your currency, if it makes sense. Are you going to be doing deals with other countries in US dollars? For China, a lot of the deals that they're doing today are not in US dollar. So over time, it's making less and less and less sense to hold US dollar. But this is another thing, because we've talked about the potential. Some have suggested this. The potential that China could use this as like a financial weapon of war, that they could basically say, boom, we're going to just collapse all of this and flood the market suddenly with that. I don't think they could ever do that and would do that. But if they wanted to, they can, utilize it in a way that would be damaging to the United States. That was the suggestion. It's like a nuclear option. Not just the US, global debt to GDP ratios are skyrocketing. And we've heard this all before. Just look at Europe. My goodness. I think it's clear what has happened. But just looking at this, for a lot of countries, they are in the same mess. This is just the US government debt to GDP. And that has risen since 2020. It's never going to come back into reality over 100%. You just don't find it getting back to what they would call normal, right? Credit card debt, everything has gone berserk. There's no question about that. And I promised you, if you got this far, that we'll look at a picture of Janet. I mean, we'll scroll quickly past it, but, I want to give people what they came here for. So Yellen says higher path for rates boost the need to lift revenue. And so I think it's important not just to stare into her eyes, but to also look at what's going on. They're talking about the interest to GDP metric. However, you could see we've raised the interest rate forecast. That does make a difference. It makes it somewhat more challenging to keep the deficits and interest expense under control. What we see here is that, like you could see it right here, this is the favorite debt metric, historically normal range, supposedly. You cannot keep the debt under control under these circumstances. They always say it's manageable. You could say it over and over. You hear that all the time from people in the industry, from people even, in articles and stuff. The debt is manageable, but of course it's not manageable. Interest rates are now far too high, and even when they were low, like just the interest payments, there are some expectations, depending on the way things go, that there's going to be $1.6 trillion worth of interest payments on the national debt. and we're in supposedly the good times. And you might say, well, you know what? It's all like, on the balance sheet. It's all digital. It's not going to create inflation or whatever. But you got to understand that interest is being paid before your roads are getting built, before your healthcare is getting done, before all the education is being paid for and everything. The interest gets paid first. So that takes away from productivity. 1 trillion plus, whatever it is at this moment, 1 trillion plus taken away from productive means every single year. And who knows, probably, is it next year's 2 trillion or all of that taken away from productive means in order to have this silly game of debt being born out of nothing, But the more time that I spend with it and sort of think about this, it's actually downward. It's like it's being born, but not like a flower coming out of the ground or a plant coming out of the ground. It's actually born downward, and we take from that debt only going further, because it goes further and further. You can't pay the debt off. There's an interest associated with that debt, and so it only goes deeper and deeper and deeper. It's the most unusual thing, like wild. Anyway. So while the stock market might be cheering up rich Americans, it's doing little to invigorate the less affluent who are trapped by inflation and struggling to cover debts thanks to sky-high borrowing costs. Inflation is a pressure cooker, and that's largely why consumer sentiment is so negative. We're talking about the vibe session here, was coined to describe the gloom feelings among the electorate. Look, what's happening here is overwhelmingly people are screwed. People are in trouble. And that system itself is the reason. You can't simply vote somebody in to fix it. It's not going to work because this system exists. It's designed to make you poor. That's the whole point. That's the whole point. That's really what's happening, okay? America's $38 trillion retirement pool is nowhere near enough. This is all part of it, intentional, so that you need to succumb to whatever that they are pushing, whether it's the UBI, whether it's a CBDC. They're going to force feed you something, and you're going to have to take it unless you are prepared to the max. You got to do what you can. You got to upskill as best you can. You got to learn things, basic things. A lot of how-to kind of videos, they're available online. You can get that sort of stuff. You can learn a lot of things that you don't need to be reliant on someone else. You want to grow garden? Oh, that's expensive. Oh, that's going to take too much time. Oh, no, it's not. No, it's not, okay? You got to look at these things and take it more seriously, whatever that is for you, because this system is in this, what I consider to be a slow and steady rot. Okay, so there are times when it goes too fast and other times it's a little slower, but you can see it over time. You just kind of zoom out hundreds of years and you see that direction. In particular, since 1913. Oops, were you allowed to talk about that? Okay. What can you do as individuals? I think it's important to have our education as best to the levels best we can. I have my free course called Compass. There's no email required, no paywall required, totally 100% free, themoneygps.com. Just click on Compass. You can share that with your family, your friends. Super, super easy course, okay? That's the number one thing. If you want to take it to the advanced level, I help people on Friday for over 2 hours and on Sunday for over 2 hours. Actually, not just saying, here's a bunch of information. I actually help people, boots on the ground, to get them hopefully to a point where they can understand this and what I believe to be the absolute best way. We're talking about building a physical products business even in these most challenging times. Trust me, okay? This is what it's all about, and I want to thank you for being here. If you appreciate this video, hit that thumbs up button, and I'll see you soon. Take care.